Hey everybody, Karen Cecilia here. I trust you have been enjoying the historic videos, the history and stories videos. And by the time most of you listen to this one, International Women's Day itself would probably have passed because I've been just taken up with a whole heap of things. But I want to tell you something today about two women who have basically blazed the trail of how we got to where we are now in terms of where we're coming from. But briefly, just to tell you that yeah, there is an International Women's Day, and how it came about is something that we don't look at mostly. But the Women's Day really originated from early in the early 20th century, when women labor workers in America started to protest for shorter hours and better pay and also for voting rights. But the whole thing came to a head by a woman, a very brave woman by the name of Clara Zetkin, who, in addressing a women's movement meeting in Zetkin in Copenhagen, turned to the crowd and said, "We need a day for ourselves. We need to have a day. We should have a day." And they chose March 8th. And so March 8th, that international conference in Copenhagen, everybody agreed, and March 8th came as the day. I think the United Nations ratified it and made it official after that, and we began this celebration. But the day itself, March 8th, was not random. It was quite an important date as to why it was chosen. March 8th was chosen in reference to women in Russia, Soviet Union at that time, if I might say so, who were leading movements of and shut down places. And one particular day, I think they shut down work and refused to do things and that, and they did that in 1917. That's what it is. It was a women went on strike for bread and peace, and because 2 million people had died, and it was that protest actually is not only that the day March 8th came out of that protest because of that protest that they did that day, but that protest in 1917 also kicked off the Russian Revolution and led to the killing of and end of the Tsar ruling and all of that. So I want to tell you, and then the United Nations ratified. I think it was sometime in the 70s, might have been 74 or 75. I think it was 75 that they ratified, and it became our day. We have a day for ourselves, and what a wonderful thing that is, that we have a day for ourselves. But I want to share a story with you from African American women. The story, and the story about is a woman that we have come to know quite well historically. Throughout history, we have come to know this woman, and most people have always seen her as kind of an attachment to a most famous man. Then, but she has her own story, and I don't believe her own story has ever been told. I mean, like today, maybe one or two people might run it and stuff, but this is the story of the woman who stood head to toe beside the man and probably did as much as he did, maybe more. They bombed her house with her baby inside it, and she still helped to carry a movement on her back. Before the world called her Mrs. King, she was Coretta Scott, just a black girl from Marion in Alabama, born into a country that had already decided how small her life was supposed to be and how insignificant she would be because she's black and she's a girl. But Coretta Scott never belonged to smallness. She never allowed that to small her up. She was born on April 27, 1927, in Perry County, Alabama, and raised in the hard truth of the Jim Crow South, where black children learn early that the world outside of their homes had rules meant to humiliate them and belittle them. Segregated schools, unequal roads, white violence wrapped in law, black ambition treated like a threat, or something that should not be tried to accomplish. But still, inside the Scott household, a different truth was lived because Coretta's father, Obadiah Scott, was a man of an unusual courage and determination. In an era when black economic independence could invite retaliation, Obadiah owned and operated land, drove trucks, operated a business, and refused to bow his head to the limits that white supremacy tried to place on him. Her mother, Bernice McMurray Scott, brought another kind of power into the home: discipline, tenderness, and music. So Coretta had formal music training, and she filled the family's life with song. From her father, Coretta learned defiance. From her mother, she learned grace and aptitude and strength. And from both, she learned that dignity was not something the world could hand you. It was something you carried for yourself. And boy, did Coretta Scott carry dignity. Her childhood was not sheltered. Black Southern children were rarely given that luxury. She walked long distances to her segregated school, while white children rode buses past her. She watched her father's successes make white neighbors angry and shouting at them. She saw black striving punished, not because it was failing, but because it was succeeding. That punishment became personal for her. The family business was targeted. Their home was constantly stoned and targeted. Their home was threatened. Fire, intimidation. Those things were not accidents. They were warnings. But Coretta also saw something else. She saw her parents keep going. So they light fire, they out them and they keep going. So they issued threats. The parents held their heads high and they kept going. And that mattered. Because courage is not just the famous speech or the dramatic stand. No, it's not. Sometimes courage is a black father rebuilding after white violence. Sometimes courage is a black mother holding her family together with music, prayer, and iron discipline. And sometimes courage is a child watching both and deciding quietly that and saying to yourself, I will not be broken either. Coretta excelled in school. She had a serious mind, a gifted voice, and a sense of purpose that was larger than the town that she came from. Music became her first great dream. She did not simply enjoy it, she lived through it. Singing gave shape to her emotions, was too big for ordinary language. In a world that constantly telling black girls what they could and could not be, music was the thing that let her imagine expansiveness, a world where she was bigger than all of that. And it was that dream that took her north. She earned a scholarship to Antioch College in Ohio, one of the few racially integrated institutions at that time willing to accept black students. But leaving Alabama did not mean leaving racism, because at Antioch she found that the North had its own polished version, its own look nice version of racism. At Antioch, their version of exclusion, when the time came for student teaching placements, she was denied access to the local public school because she was black. So even there in the North, even as a brilliant young woman with talent and discipline, the door was still being closed in her face from time to time. But Coretta Scott was not a woman who measured herself by other people's doors. She was a kind of woman who adapted. So she adapted, she persisted, and she graduated with a degree in music and education. Then she moved to Boston to study at the New England Conservatory of Music, which was one of the nation's most prestigious music schools back then. She wanted to be a concert singer. A black girl from Alabama wanted to be a concert singer. That was her dream. And that was not symbolic for her. It was not secondary. It was not even decorative. It was her own dream. A black woman in the 1950s entering the overwhelmingly white world of classical music with her full intentions. But that part of her story matters because too many people meet Coretta Scott only as a wife and widow and not as the gifted, intellectually serious, politically conscious woman that she really, really was. When she met Martin Luther King Jr., she was not waiting to be awakened. She didn't join his movement for him to give her any kind of validation. She was already validated. She was already awake. She had studied peace movements. She had thought deeply about justice. She understood global struggles against oppression. She did not become politically aware because she married Martin Luther King Jr. Oh no, she recognized in him a moral seriousness that matched her own. The version of history that makes her an accessory to his purpose is totally incomplete and unfair. She was not pulled into history by being married to Martin Luther King Jr. She walked into it with purpose. When they married in 1953 and moved to Montgomery, Alabama, Coretta entered a life that would ask more of her than most people could survive. The Montgomery bus boycott began in 1955, and suddenly, this young couple with a baby at home found themselves at the center of a national reckoning. She got the late night phone calls at all hours of the night. The threats came daily. Hatred circled their home. And then, on January 30th, 1956, their house was bombed. Coretta was inside, and so was her infant daughter, Yolanda. I want you to sit with that for a moment. A mother and her baby were in the house when it exploded because white America was so enraged by the idea of black dignity that it was willing to kill them for it. What happened to Coretta Scott King? She did not collapse. She did not disappear. She did not beg for safety. When neighbors gathered in fear and fury, it was Coretta, calm, steady, clear, who helped keep the monument and all of the things from turning into bloodshed. That strength did not come from nowhere. It came from Marianne. It came from Marianne. It came from the roads she had walked. It came from the fires she had seen. It came from the parents who taught her that standing after devastation is its own kind of victory. And that was only the beginning. For years, Coretta lived with a terror most people cannot even imagine. Because every time Martin Luther left the house, there was a chance he would not ever come back. Every march, every rally, every public appearance carried danger. She raised 4 children under the constant shadow of assassination. She managed a household, sustained a marriage under historic pressure, and served as an emotional ballast for a movement that leaned heavily on public men and too often overlooked the women holding everything together, standing behind them. But Coretta was never merely behind anything. She spoke, she organized, she traveled, she sang at mass meetings and freedom events, turning music into movement. The voice she had trained for concert halls now strengthened crowds fighting for liberation. Her art did not disappear. It merely transformed. And then came April 4th, 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis. Coretta received the kind of news that splits a life into various pieces, small pieces, both before and after, because the man that she loved, the father of her children, the partner who understood the deepest call on her life, was gone in an instant. And many people expected her to grieve silently. But silence was not Coretta. Instead, her grief clarified her. Just days after his murder, she went to Memphis and led the march that he had planned. 4 children had lost their father. She had lost her husband. And still, she stepped into public view and kept the work moving. That was Coretta Scott King. Not ornamental, not secondary, not just surviving history. At that point, she was directing it. What she did after 1968 is one of the most undertaught chapters in modern black history regarding women's role. She founded the King Center in Atlanta to preserve and extend the philosophy of nonviolence, not in honor of her husband, but her own belief, her own guidance. She fought for years to establish Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a federal holiday. She did that, organizing, lobbying, testifying, pushing a nation that preferred selective memory other than to, she pushed them. She pushed them to full accountability. And she won. The holiday exists because she would not let his legacy be reduced to a mass funeral. But her vision was larger than memorializing one man. She opposed apartheid in South Africa. She supported labor rights. She spoke against war. She later advocated for LGBTQ equality, understanding that justice cannot be moral in one room and silent in another room. Justice cannot be selective. Justice cannot be about gender or gender bending. She saw the freedom struggle as connected: race, class, peace, gender, human dignity, love. And she refused to narrow her conscience to make other people comfortable. And that too was Coretta Scott King, a woman of moral breadth, a woman whose politics were not borrowed, a woman who understood that nonviolence was not passivity, but disciplined resistance. She understood that resistance must not only be in action and words, but it must always be a part of you. When you stepped out, everyone must be able to see it. It must not be passive. She died on January 30th, 2006, exactly 50 years to the day after the bombing of her home in Montgomery. But there's something almost unbearably powerful in that symmetry. Because 50 years after white terror tried to destroy her family, the woman who survived it left this earth having outlived the bombers, the segregationists, and many of the men who once underestimated her. But more than that, she left behind institutions, language, courage, and example. She left behind children who will choose to love not by gender, but by people. Coretta Scott King's life reminds us that black women have always been more than the footnotes attached to famous men. They have been strategists, moral anchors, builders, artists, and visionaries. They have carried movements while the spotlight looked everywhere else. Before she became a widow, the world could name a widow that the world could name. She was a child walking Alabama roads with books in her arms. Before she became an icon of grief, she was a singer with a dream all of her own. Before she became Mrs. King, she was Coretta Scott. Brilliant, disciplined, politically awake, beautiful, and already becoming the woman history would one day need. And history did need her desperately. So when we say her name, let us say it whole. Let us say it with everything that it deserves, not as an accessory to a great man, but as greatness itself. Coretta Scott King did not just stand beside history or a man who helped created it or shaped it. She steadied it. Get it? So, let us celebrate Coretta Scott King. Please remember to like the video and share it and leave a comment. We are going to talk about another great woman who we all know, Rosa Parks, as the woman who kind of lit the civil rights movement. But we were taught that she was tired when she boarded that bus on December 1st in 1955. And that is how we know her, the woman who took the seat and said she not get up. She took her seat and she refused to give it up to a white man. But Rosa Parks was so much more than that. She was doing so much more than that just 12 years before that bus incident. And today I want to share with you some of the things that Rosa Parks accomplished as a great black woman. So before December 1st, 1955, there were 12 years. 12 years of driving through hostile Alabama counties to reach women who had been raped and had no one else to call. 12 years of persuading traumatized people to sign their names to affidavits that could get them killed because silence was the only alternative. 12 years of filing reports with federal authorities who read them, filed them, and forgot them. Rosa Parks wasn't just a tired seamstress who stumbled into history on December 1st, 1955. Not at all. She was not. She was a trained investigator, a seasoned organizer, and one of the most courageous women in the American South. And almost no one knew her name before that day. Almost no one. But here's the thing. Rosa Parks joined the Montgomery NAACP in 1943. The same year, she first clashed with a bus driver named James Blake, who threw her off his bus for daring to re-enter the bus through the front door. What did Rosa Parks did? She filed it away and she kept working. She worked the case of Reese Taylor, a young mother gang assaulted by men walking home from church, arriving to find the sheriff already there, circling the house, waiting to intimidate anyone who asks questions. What Rosa Parks did, she documented it anyway. She launched a national campaign. The men were never even charged. But Rosa Parks filed it. She worked case after case after case. Women silenced by shame and fear. Young men facing death sentences on false accusations. Families whose grief had no courtroom, no headline, no justice. Year after year after year, the system delivered the same answer. Nothing. By the summer of 1955, she was close to giving up. Then a civil rights colleague arranged for her to attend a 2-week leadership workshop at Highlander Folk School in Tennessee. Now, Highlander Folk School in Tennessee was one of the only integrated spaces in the entire South at that time. So for the first time in her adult life, Rosa Parks sat, ate, and planned alongside white and black people as equals. She later wrote it, and this is how she described it, and I quote, she said, "One of the few times in my life up to that point when I did not feel any hostility from white people." End of quote. She left that meeting restored. She left ready. She left motivated. 3 weeks later, 14-year-old Emmett Till was murdered in Mississippi. His mother insisted on an open casket. The photograph ran in Jet magazine. The whole country saw it. There was a trial. The jury deliberated for 67 minutes, as you all remember, in the Emmett Till case, and they acquitted both white men. Parks had documented cases like Emmett Till for over a decade. Children, women, men, buried quietly, kept out of newspapers, swept under rugs. But now, with the nation watching, with a trial, with a photograph from an open casket, the men still walked free. On December 1st, 1955, she boarded a bus in Montgomery, lost in her thought. She sat in the middle section. At the third stop, white passengers boarded. The driver turned around. It was the same driver, Mr. James Blake, the same man who had thrown her off his bus 12 years earlier. And he shouted, "Y'all better make it light on yourself and let me have those seats." 3 people stood up. Rosa Parks stayed in her seat. When the officer arrived and asked why she hadn't moved, she looked at the white officer and asked quietly, "Why do you push us around?" He didn't have an answer. He arrested her anyway. That night, E.D. Nixon posted bail and recognized immediately what the movement had in Rosa Parks. Not a symbol manufactured for a movement, but a woman the movement had been quietly building for 12 years. Respected, strategic, unimpeachable in character. The Montgomery bus boycott lasted 381 days. It cost Rosa her job, her husband's job, her health, and eventually her home city. She and Raymond, her husband, moved to Detroit in 1957, where she spent the rest of her working life helping constituents navigate poverty, housing discrimination, and police brutality. The same fight in a different city. She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Congressional Gold Medal. The Congress called her the mother of the freedom movement, rightly so. When she died in 2005 at the age of 92, she became the first private citizen to lie in honor at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. So please, let us all remember Rosa Parks correctly. Not a woman who sat in the middle section of a bus because she's tired and she's not getting up. Not as a woman who was tired on the wrong evening, but as a woman who spent 12 years making herself and a movement that was ready for exactly that moment that truth came about. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is far more powerful than the myth of just a bus ride. Thank you all so much for listening. History and Stories. Please remember to like and share the video. And leave me a comment or something. God bless you all. Stay safe, everybody. And keep your children safe.